Hey everybody, welcome to Live It Out Now. I'm Kyle, and with me is Sam and Nikki. We're all about following Jesus, sharing our lives together, and helping each other be transformed and shaped by Jesus. So this is our second episode. We hope you tuned in for the first one, and we're glad you're here today. I wanted to talk a little bit as we're opening up just about a couple different things. First of all, like our logo, maybe you've noticed we have a logo now. Woohoo. It's a lion for two reasons. First is Live It Out Now spells lion, which is maybe a little corny, but hey, it works. And the other one, probably the more important one, is that a lion is a symbol for Jesus. And so we really wanted to center our show around Jesus and what he's all about. Today we're starting a new series called Meeting Jesus, and we're going to be looking at stories where people encounter Jesus to see how Jesus interacts with them and how their lives are changed. And so we're glad you're here with us.
Okay, and if you watched our video last week, you know that we're using Discovery Bible Study Method, or DBS, and that's largely because we really like that it's focused around community and how we can commune with each other, talk about life together in a very real, tangible way. It's not solely focused on the more academic textual side, even though that is brought in. It's connecting the text with our real lives, and doing that as a group with our brothers and sisters is really cool. And so that's why we're using that model.
But first, we're going to talk about life and just check in on how everybody's doing. So I'll ask Kyle. Kyle, what you go first? Let's start with the highs of last week.
Yeah, so last week was pretty great. I got to spend some time with my dad. I think I mentioned that last episode that he was coming into town. My dad works in Arkansas most of the time, so I don't always get to see him. And he came home, and he and my mom are doing remodeling on their house. And so we've just been like tearing apart their house for months, basically. And we got to spend some time putting it all back together. That was pretty sweet. So it's good to see my dad and do some work on the house, and just great to spend time with family. So that's probably my high from the week.
Nikki.
My high from the week. I don't know, this week kind of flew by in a little bit of a blur, honestly. But I got to do some work each day, which sounds kind of lame, I guess, in like the big scope of things. But in this COVID-19, it's really nice to be able to do my job as a school psychologist a little bit. Actually, every day I either had like meetings, I got to do some report writing. Normally, I would say that meetings and report writing are my least favorite pieces to my job. When I'm in a school, I prefer the time when I'm actually working with kids. But in this, quarantine time, when I haven't gotten to work with kids and I haven't really gotten to do my normal meetings or normal reports, it was nice to actually just return to a little bit of that normalcy.
Yeah. And I'll transition us kind of into the next question by answering, both.
Both. Yeah.
Okay. So for me, I kind of have to go through my challenge to meet my high. And it's kind of interesting. This week has been really tough for me. I feel like I'm spread very thin. We just started up this new project. For those of you that don't know, I'm editing our church worship every week. We record, and then I have to edit that, and so that takes a long time. And I got like 50 other projects going. Plus, I'm a full-time youth minister, so I have two jobs. I'm a youth minister, and then I'm also a technology minister, it seems like. And so this week I felt really thinly spread. And Wednesday night came around, and I just did not want to record. Mike Lewis, for those that you don't know, Big Mike Lewis, he's the worship minister here, and he organized a bunch of singers to come for our worship service on Sunday, and they were going to come on Wednesday night at 7. I just did not want to come back to the building. And I was really stressed about it because I had never taken 6 singers and implemented that into our worship service before, and it was just a huge project. But God works in weird ways, and through that, it just really encouraged me because I got to hear people singing, worshiping together for the first time in 8 weeks. people that really enjoy singing, and just to do something I love. I love sound engineering. For those of you, again, that don't know, I got my degree in sound engineering. And so to do something I love and be a part of this worship service was just a huge blessing for me. And that was my high from the last week, as well as the challenge. So yeah, Kyle, what's a challenge for you this week?
Yeah, so this last week was, for the most part, it was really great. One challenge though that kind of comes and goes for me in my life, and some of you know this about me and my wife. Some of you don't, but it was Mother's Day, and we're both blessed to have both of our mothers, and we can share some of that time together. But my wife and I have been trying to have kids for like a couple years now, and it's just been a really rocky road throughout this whole journey. And so, that was just kind of that reminder that it hasn't happened yet. So it's weird kind of balancing just this great time of being able to be with my mom and celebrate that with her, and yet also having just kind of that sour taste in your mouth of, we wish that we could be parents. And so, it's weird. It's something that comes and goes. It's been a struggle and a journey for us for a while. But fortunately, we've got a lot of people who have been a support for us over the years. So, I mean, it's been a challenge, and just that was a reminder last week. But, the thing about challenges is when you have those people in your life, when you have that faith in your life, even though it doesn't always just instantly go away, you feel loved, and you feel better, and you feel encouraged. And so despite that, it's still been a really great week. How about you, Nikki?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for sharing that, Kyle and Sam. I mean, both of you. Yeah, my challenge, I want to be open and honest, but I also don't want to call out other humans on the internet. So I'll just say that, I had a conversation with someone this week, and it wasn't a great conversation. Like, even just the topic and the whole origin was very uncomfortable. But this other person, who is an important person in my life, said some things that just really like jabbed at me. And sometimes I'm really good about just moving on from a conversation like that. I'm like, it's fine. Like, things got heated. Like, it's all good. But this week, I mean, largely just because, we're not getting our normal, like, socialization every day. There's not as much to, like, replace, I suppose, a bad interaction or like kind of help move on. And so instead, I'm just left in my house with my cat and my dog to try to, like, digest and let things go. And it can be really, really difficult. And especially, just as a person, I can get into a really bad habit of dwelling on things, especially when I feel like they could have gone better, or if they just really hurt me, I'll sit there and dwell on it and be like, well, maybe it was something that wasn't nice was really true and I need to fix it. And I can just really spiral. And so that was kind of my challenge this week, was not letting that one conversation ruin my entire week or my mood throughout the entire week.
Yeah, for sure. I know how that is. I like to dwell as well on the negative.
So we've talked about negative things, and it got heavy, but this is real life. And to bring it back up a little bit, we're going to talk about where we see God at work. And I'll go first with this one. Where I see God at work is, I mean, it's just, I said this last week, but I just see God at work through this quarantine and through this virus. I don't know. I'm very optimistic. I'm an optimistic person. I love to see good things, and I see God really pushing us. I see God moving us in a direction, and he really used the worship service to help me see that he is working through it, and that he is still here, that he is still with us, and that he still loves us, and that no greater joy comes but through him. And I had lost sight of that this week because I was so stressed, but I got to go to that worship service, and I felt full, and I haven't felt like that in 8 weeks, through all this stuff. And it was just a huge blessing for me. I see God at work through that. And I hope that people that watch this worship service this week, especially at Southwest, see that God is still here and that he's got this.
Yeah. I'll go next. Streaming our services has been, a big transition for a lot of churches. One thing that I saw this week where God was working, we were trying this thing where, Chris, he's in his house. He's our lead minister, and he's streaming the service. And we were trying to Skype call me in to lead the communion talk live, so it doesn't have to be pre-recorded, make it a little more authentic, that kind of stuff. And we tested it all out, and I guess it's kind of another challenge, but it was all working well until it was actually time to do the service. And for whatever reason, it just was not working. My audio was all messed up. And so I was just like, kind of like on my end, it sounded fine, but most people could kind of barely understand what I was saying. And I ended that time just thinking, oh man, what a train wreck, because that's just how I am. Things have to be perfect or else I, dwell on the negative.
Yeah,
so
me too.
But like right after worship was done, I got this email from someone who was just so thankful for what I shared. Apparently they could, hear me well enough. And it was humbling because I knew it wasn't my words. It was really cool to see that it doesn't matter what Kyle does. Like that was just a reminder that what Kyle tries to do, like, will fail at some point, But what God was doing through me succeeded. And so that was just really cool to know that I don't have to do things perfectly. I will mess up, and in spite of my failures or the failures of technology or whatever, God's still working. God's message still comes through. And so that was just really encouraging to be reminded of that. How about you, Nikki?
Yeah, I think, kind of going hand in hand with what I said about my challenge in that because there's not normal life, if we will, going on, it was harder to digest the negative and like kind of replace that and get rid of it because I had new things to worry about. Well, the flip side being that with all of us in quarantine, I feel like we recognize these smaller things a little bit more. So like the good things that we can appreciate, like today, a friend from Arkansas sent me this hat as a gift, which I thought was like really cool. And it's not that I wouldn't appreciate that on any given day, but it was like extra exciting because I'm just sitting at home for a week at a time and then I get cool mail. Or, when we came in to do filming, Kara had left me some candy and a little note. And it's like I said, I would always appreciate that gesture, but it's like an extra added bonus because it's this little thing that stands out and shines kind of in the midst of this very monotonous routine that we're all in now.
Yeah. So through this, we hope that you guys got something. I hope that you guys also ask yourself these questions and look at these. What is your high from last week? What is a challenge that you had last week? But ultimately, where do you see God at work? Because I think that really directs us. That really points us in a good direction. We lose sight of where God is at work all the time. It's so easy to do, to lose sight of that. But to keep that focus is to really ask yourself that question constantly. Where do I see God? And that'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah, and these questions, they're designed to prepare us as we come to Scripture. Again, like DBS, it's not just open the text, read it, and then what do you get out of it? It's supposed to help us realize that we are human, that we have all these things going on in our life, but that last question orienting us to what is God doing, it helps prepare our hearts to receive the word. And so this is our word for today. We are in Luke chapter 5. This will be, again, our first episode on meeting Jesus. So all of these stories are going to be people who meet Jesus and what happens when they encounter him. So Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Jesus meets Peter here. So I'm going to read it now, and then Nikki's going to retell the story so we can just kind of hear it in our own words again. All right, here we go. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, The people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put it out a little to shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him.
Thanks, Kyle. So, I hear the story and I just picture, so Jesus is, on land, he's talking to a group of people, they're all listening to him, he's got things to share with them, and he looks and he sees these fishermen that are coming in, they're at the end of their work, right? They're at the end of their day or night, and they're kind of wrapping things up, putting their boats away, and he goes over and he gets into one of the 2 boats and he asks that it be put out in the water, and he continues kind of his lesson, whatever he's saying to the crowd, right? And then he tells Peter to put the nets out into the water. And Peter's kind of going, dude, this is how I imagine it anyway. I won't, pretend to know for sure, but I'm imagining that Peter is like, we just did this. Like, we just got in, we're done. But okay, because you said so, all right, like, I will follow your request and we'll put the nets in. I don't get from this text that Peter's anticipating much is going to happen because he just got in from a full day of this and they didn't catch anything. And so they let down the nets, and then the fish just, swarm the nets. They're taking on so many fish, they have to call other fishermen for help. They're filling the boats. The boats are being weighted down with how much fish they're catching. And so then when Peter realizes what's happening, he kind of falls at Jesus' feet. And, I hear this as kind of the, like, I'm not worthy of this. And he's, really recognizing, he already recognized Jesus as a teacher, as a master, as rabbi. But in this, he's recognizing the power and kind of who Jesus is. And he's saying, no, like, I'm not worthy of this. Like, go away from me, And Jesus' response is essentially, no, don't worry, you're coming with me. And I've got a new job for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to add a little bit onto this. Everybody knows at Southwest, if you're in my youth group, that I love context. You have to know context of this. So let's start with some context. The Lake of Gennesaret, or however Kyle said it, I don't remember.
Exactly the same.
Gennesaret is a town on the Sea of Galilee. It's the Sea of Galilee. Luke is the only person that uses that word. Gennesaret is a town, actually, where Simon Peter is from. If you go there, you can still they think they know where his house is. You can see that. But anyway, Gennesaret is a town on the Sea of Galilee, and so it's just an interesting tidbit there.
There's a town on the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah, exactly. And so I also think it's interesting. There's a couple things that really stick out to me in this story. I don't fish. I don't like to eat fish, but I know about fishing. So anyway, I'm going to start at the beginning and work my way through this. Couple things that stick out to me. One, there's a crowd following Jesus. And it's so interesting because a crowd is following Jesus, and this is not abnormal. Crowds follow Jesus everywhere. But Peter, or Simon, is not in that crowd. He's on the shore washing his nets, not listening to anything Jesus is saying. So Jesus is like, there's somebody over there not listening to me. I'm going to go jump in their boat. And so he jumps in his boat, And he's like, hey, put out to water a little bit so they can hear me. So he puts out to water. And something else that also sticks out to me is that, so Jesus knew that Simon wasn't listening. So he gets in his boat, puts out to water, and says, and then starts speaking to the crowd. Well, if you're in a boat with Jesus speaking to a crowd, you have to be listening to the story. You have to be listening to it. There's no other way. Then Jesus says, put out to water. So in the story, it talks about how they had just come in from all night fishing. And so Jesus says, well, let's go back out. Let's go to the deepest part of the sea. So anybody that knows fishing and knows that about fishing is the deepest part of the water during the hottest part of the day. The fish will not be on the surface, anywhere near the surface, because it's hot. They're going to swim down. And if you're doing nets, your nets are only what, 20 feet down? Fish are going to be way lower than that. So I just imagine, I mean, like you were saying, he's like, oh my goodness, whatever. Peter knows about fishing, and Jesus is like, do it anyway. And Peter's like, okay, whatever you say. I mean, I just imagine like this.
Probably sarcastic.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Whatever. I'll do it, Jesus. But they catch fish anyway. I mean, it's just so interesting. That's such an interesting part of the story to get, like I said, to give context about fishing, because you do not catch fish in the hottest part of the day in the deepest part of the water. Yeah. So anyway.
Unless you're Jesus.
Well, and that's just it, because, when we're going through DBS, our first question is, what does this passage tell us about God? And I feel like that's a really key point, that God doesn't do things the way we think they should be done, or the way we expect them to be done, or even the way what we understand as the laws of this planet say that they should be done. He does things his own way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So
yeah, that's good. I mean, those are good details. I don't really fish. I've caught a few fish at the Camp Yamhill Mill Pond, but I wouldn't have known where to start. And just that little details like that, again, like, we don't always catch those things. That's why I like to read the Bible in community. But the people who were there watching, or the people who were reading this, they knew more about this stuff. And so that would have been a crucial detail, seeing that Jesus is really, I think, testing Peter already a little bit to say, hey, let's go to this very unlikely spot to catch fish and just see what happens. And Peter obliges, but it's really interesting,
Well, and that tells us about God. Like, we're so skeptical that we're gonna. I mean, it makes me think of like the limited. What's it called? Matthew 28, Great Commission, the limited commission. The limited commission, where he tells people to go out, and I imagine those people as well being very skeptical about what's going to happen. But Peter's like, okay, I'll go anyway. But when you do it, when you follow what God is saying, results happen. Results happen. And so you have to be listening for what God says. Like when God's telling you something, when you think God's telling you something, obviously you have to do some discernment. But when God is directly speaking to you, do it, because big results can come. I mean, so much so that there's so many fish that you're sinking your boat.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge, huge thing.
Yeah.
It is. And it makes me wonder, like, the relationship between God and people in this story, at least between Jesus and Peter, is, Peter's got maybe that skepticism, but he does agree to it. And then, Jesus goes and we have this whole story. But what if Peter had said no? Like, what if Peter had said, get out of my boat? And
he could have.
He could have. And, we can't say for any certainty what would have happened in that scenario. But I think from the stories we do have of Jesus, I think it's entirely likely that Jesus would say, okay, and then leave.
And he missed that opportunity. Peter missed that opportunity. Right?
Yeah, because I think that we see this over and over and over again in stories where there's this invitation for great things, or for great blessing, or for miracles, or for whatever it is. But that's what it is. It's an invitation. And we always have that option as people to decline it. We don't always know what it's going to be when we first get to make that choice. But yeah, I can't, I just wonder, it's hard to know, but I wonder how many opportunities that I miss just because I'm like, that doesn't make any sense based on my very limited knowledge as a human. And I'm going to say that doesn't make sense. I'm not going to do that. No.
You know, we're talking about what this passage tells us about God. One thing that I see, you know, from Peter's perspective, kind of like Nikki brought up, we see this transformation almost from Jesus as just like a teacher, rabbi. I mean, he would have probably had some respect. I mean, again, a crowd's following him. That's probably why Peter obliges in this situation. But then later on, he's recognized more as someone who's beyond just a teacher. And like, I think we can learn a lot from Peter's response when they get back on shore. You know, he says, "Go away from me, Lord." Now he's calling him Lord. "I'm a sinful man." He recognizes the power, like Nikki said. And so something that we can, I think, learn about God, and maybe a little bit about people too, is that when people encounter God, when people encounter this miraculous power, it is very humbling. You know, they're put in their place in I think a good way, you know, because Peter recognizes his own failings, his own sin, and he wants to distance himself from God, from Jesus, and Jesus's response is, "No, you're coming with me." And so not only can we see like how humans respond in those kind of situations, but we see God, or, you know, through Jesus, extending this invitation: "Come, be with me, follow me." And I think that's really powerful. You know, Peter has already kind of stuck his foot in his mouth or whatever, and he'll do that many more times.
Absolutely.
You know, but already Jesus is inviting him to follow him.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And I think just with that, you know, we've talked a lot about context and how that's important. You know, Peter would have recognized, especially if he's recognizing Jesus as even just as rabbi or as teacher, for a rabbi to say to Jews, you know, "Come follow me, come be my apprentice," in that sense was a huge honor and privilege. And likely if Peter was a fisherman, it's because he did not go through the ranks or meet requirements as a child to become kind of that follower of a rabbi. And so for then the Lord to come and say, "No, follow me, I will be your master and your teacher," is a huge honor. And that's part of why, you know, these guys are so willing just to leave their stuff behind. I always wondered that before I kind of knew more about the context. Like, why would these people just follow this dude? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But it actually was a huge honor, even just in the context of Jewish culture. And I think that that's still something we can apply too, that it is a privilege and honor to be asked to follow follow a godly path and to serve him.
Yeah, I'm gonna meld the first two questions kind of together. So the first two questions are, what does this passage tell us about God, and what do we learn about people? And this is an interesting thing. So I talked about it before, that Jesus sees Peter on the side of the Sea of Galilee in his boat, cleaning his nets, when Jesus has this huge crowd, which, like, again, is not abnormal. But Jesus gets in the boat with Peter or Simon, either one, gets in the boat and tells them to put out. There's only two people in that boat. And Jesus tells him, he does his sermon for the crowd, and then he says, "Put out into deep water." And then Jesus, it says, "Put down the nets," and then pull them up. And what's so interesting to me is, again, there's only two people in that boat. So Jesus is working with Simon to get the fish in the boat. And that tells us so much. Obviously, Jesus' main purpose on this earth was not a role model, but that is Jesus in one sense, is to be a role model. And how does that relate to us? What do we need to learn from that? Now, sometimes we need to last week we talked about that sycamore tree. We need to raise people up, but sometimes it's going to have us work. God's going to have us work for it. And we're going to have to get in somebody's boat to understand their lifestyle, tell them to put out to sea, and then help them raise those fish and build that faith. And that's what Jesus is doing, is building that faith. He's testing it. Yeah. He's pulling up fish. And when he's talking to a skeptic earlier, now Simon believes. And we have to do that as well sometimes, that we're going to have to get into people's boats to understand where they are and then help them through that. We're going to have to do some research and to understand them.
Yeah, I mean, it might not always happen as fast as it happens in this story, but you can see the process, the intentionality, I think, when you really focus in on what Jesus is doing, right? He sees that Simon Peter is maybe not paying attention, and we kind of assume that, but it's probably accurate, you know. And he goes over to him. Again, he does get into his boat. He levels with him. He gets to know him in a sense. And they go out to sea, and there's this kind of test that he offers. And then, yeah, again, we assume he helps Peter do that work. He's working alongside him. And when you extend this metaphor out to how we interact with other people, I think there's a lot of things that we as humans can learn, that we've got to get into people's boat. We've got to level with them. We've got to get to know them and watch that faith develop over time, and help that faith develop, just like Jesus does with Simon Peter. Anything else that we saw that we can learn about people in this passage before we move on?
I think I said all I need to say.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add on that.
Cool.
Yeah, so our next part is what is the Holy Spirit revealed to you in this passage that you will follow, or that we will follow? I'm not sure on this one. I don't know if one of you guys wants to start, if you have an idea.
I'm going to revert back to those questions. I mean, just that idea that I need to get in people's boats. Again, last week we talked about that sycamore tree and raising people up. But there's work to be done. And the Holy Spirit has really moved me and pushed me in that direction to understand that I need to level with people. I need to understand where they are first and what they're going through, and do my research to understand that they're a fisherman, and I need to talk to them where they're at. That's something I learned as a cop, but I didn't think that I would, bring into ministry. As a cop, you figure out where they are. You figure out their whole story. And in ministry, you just want to save people. You just want to be that sycamore tree all the time, just raising people up to see Jesus. And it's super simple. I'm just here as a pillar. But it's not. And it's not as a disciple. It's not, I'm a full-time minister, but I'm a disciple of Christ first. And so how do I do that? How do I get in someone's boat and do some research, find the evidence, and figure out how to fish?
Yeah.
I'm using that, we're talking about this, but I'm using that as an example. How do I fish? How do I understand that first? And then I can level with this person and get them
as a
and
real
get them
person.
to, what's that?
Getting to know them as a real person, not just a project or whatever.
Yeah. And then getting them to follow Jesus and leave that boat behind.
Yeah. I'll kind of share what has really stuck out to me again, read this passage beforehand, but I didn't see this until we're sitting here together, and I really do feel convicted by this. It's interesting to me that Jesus is with a crowd of people, and he leaves that crowd to go talk to Simon, one person. And for me, the kind of person I am, for any of you who care about this, I'm an Enneagram 3, so I like success. And when I see Jesus with this huge crowd around him, that is success, right? He's got this following already. Jesus does not care about that, though. And not that he doesn't care about the people, but he doesn't care about the number. He leaves the crowd to go get into Peter's boat, one person. And when we look at, who Peter becomes throughout the New Testament, Jesus made a good choice there.
The rock.
Peter was shaped by Jesus, in incredible ways. His whole life is transformed. But for me, that idea that sometimes what I think is success, what I think is working, is not what I need to be doing. And maybe I need to turn my vision to see that one person that I need to get in their boat, that I need to spend some time with and really disciple. And to me, that's really convicting, because I generally don't function in that way, just because of kind of how I'm built or whatever.
It's funny, you two both, I feel like, very much focused on what Jesus does, which is appropriate. But for me, I think what stands out more right now is just Peter and his response, because I feel like he says yes to Jesus several times before he knows or has any idea what's going on. He doesn't kick Jesus out of his boat. He puts it in the water. He puts the nets down, even though he even says to Jesus, like, I don't really understand why we're going to do that, but okay, you said so. And, there has been, as far as what we know, there's been no promise that fish will come. There's been no promise that Jesus is going to work any miracles. He's just telling Peter to do this thing. And Peter says, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to follow this. I'm going to do what you say. And so I'm just thinking, like, how many times, is there an opportunity for me to say yes and follow when I don't get to have any sort of clue if we're going somewhere, what's coming, why, but it's still best in the big story to just trust and follow.
And that's an important point. I mean, for me, I love to control things. I love to know where we're going. I mean, I was a cop. I controlled things. I controlled situations, and it taught me to do that. I mean, the 3 years that I was a cop, I got even more of that. And so, to just be a Peter and say, yeah, Lord, I'll do it. I don't know where we're going. I don't know what's going to happen. And it may look stupid to me, but I'll do it.
Yeah. And to be real honest, that can be super frustrating sometimes when we just want, like, God, I want to follow you. Just show me, just give me the answer and I'll get there. But that's not how God works typically. He knows that sense of unknown will build our faith once we finally arrive. And you can see that Peter gets on his knees after just catching some fish in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And so when he arrived, he knew his faith was just, changed.
Yeah, and it's baby steps. I mean, it's funny because we want to know the whole picture. We want control. And it's like, we sometimes don't get to know anything. Yeah. It's just, I want you to take this step.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you why.
Well, yeah. And, it's funny, that idea, I have teens ask me that all the time. I just want to know more. I don't know where my life is headed. I don't know any of this stuff. And you know what?
Been there.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
And that's a real talk. I say it as a joke and I say it with a smile, but that's real. Sometimes you just have to go along with the ride and see where God leads you. Because I got my degree in sound engineering, but here I am, a youth minister, and I was a cop
in between.
Yeah. And so I'm just along for the ride.
Yeah. I was just talking with a friend. This is kind of just a side note, but I was talking with a friend today about this very thing. In ministry, it can be kind of a grind sometime. And I heard that, or I read somewhere that, Mother Teresa, when she hears the call from God to go to Calcutta, and spend time with the people there. And from what I understand, after that, she never heard God's voice again. She never felt this clear direction from God ever again. And yet through that whole time, she remained faithful to that work. How frustrating would that be, and yet how rewarding?
Absolutely.
So I think that's a good point, and it's amazing what we can draw out of Scripture when we really allow the Holy Spirit to reveal it to us. Kind of gets us to our last question.
Yeah.
Right, Nikki?
Yeah. How do we have eyes to see opportunities to live it out now? And I feel like, like you said, Kyle, we kind of just covered it in a sense. I mean, for me, it's, okay, what opportunities am I going to have presented that I feel are a wise choice or a good choice, or, I've prayed about it and I just feel at peace about it. That's usually how I know when I'm making a good decision. But there are times when I'll pray about something and I'll feel at peace about that decision, but that doesn't mean I want to do it. Yeah. And so there's a difference. And so I think for me, it's just being really acutely aware. If I feel that peace about a decision, or if I don't, then maybe that's not a good decision to make. That's not a good step to take for whatever reason. And that's really challenging for me because the way I show that I like control is I like to have a lot of reasoning that I can put into like a pro-con list behind every decision. And I feel like especially when God's calling us to do something or if he's closing a door, there's not always the reasoning on paper as to why we should go a certain direction. In fact, a more like tangible example I can even think of is I changed jobs, or I'm in the process of changing jobs, I suppose, from my current employer to a school district that I worked in this year, but they haven't been my employer technically. Now switching jobs on paper makes absolutely no sense. There's less professional development. I'm taking a pay decrease. There's really kind of fewer windows of opportunity to branch out within my career, within a research aspect of my career. But I love it so much, and I just feel like it's the place that I am successful and that I'm doing well. And so, I prayed a lot about it, and it's just the right choice. Like there's no tangible way for me to say that other than just I know it. I feel the sense of peace about it, and so I'm going to do it. And I think there are more opportunities in my daily life than just that one example that I just need to pay more attention to and be more willing to say yes, even if I don't really understand the why or I can't list it out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. When I think about like opportunities to live it out now and how can I see that, it just makes me think about awareness. When I was a teen, probably like most teens, I did not necessarily have a very good sense of awareness. I did not practice that very well. And I feel like I've grown in that, but, could still improve. But praying for that awareness, because I think that's something we see in Jesus here, is that, he's with the crowd and yet he is aware of Peter. And that, again, gives Jesus the eyes to see that opportunity. And so I guess for me, as I'm thinking through this passage, how can I be more aware to those people around me? I need to get into their boat, I need to level with them. And again, like I said, a lot of times I think I miss that. And so actually like praying for awareness, for those opportunities, and then the courage to take them. I think God listens to that, and I think he helps us in that, because I'm not always too keen on getting in people's boats. I like my space, I like to be over here on the shore. I don't really like the water very much anyways. But sometimes I got to get in the boat and go out to the deep waters.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one. Being a youth minister, it's easy to want the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Want those. I want the big numbers, but what are we really doing when we get big numbers? Yeah, sometimes big numbers is great. Southwest, we have I say it all the time. It's kind of a brag, I guess, but I say I have 50 people or 50 kids in my youth group. Well, what does that really mean? Do I really know all these kids? Am I in their boat? Do I understand what they're going through? Not really. And so I need to be better at that. I need to be better at getting in the boat and going and visiting and having lunch with these kids or just taking them cookies to their house, doing that kind of stuff. And then the other side of that is other side of the coin is what boat am I in, and what boat do I need to leave to follow Jesus?
Yeah.
How do I live that out now? How do I get rid of that boat? How do I just, this is dragging me away. This is pulling my attention from what Jesus is saying. And how is Jesus getting into my boat where I have to listen to him?
Yeah. Yeah, Sam, you bring up a good point. I don't want to move on before we just, at least briefly talk about that idea that, we focused a lot about Jesus getting in the boat, but we didn't really talk about Peter and James and John. They leave their boats behind. Mm-hmm. And that's like very symbolic of them leaving their entire livelihood behind. I think when this story is told in Mark or something,
in John, it's just like they just up and follow him.
Yeah. In one of the Gospels, I think it's Mark, James and John are with their dad, and they leave their dad behind too, you know? And so that's tough. Like, we can't just gloss over that. They leave pretty much everything to follow Jesus. And I think we are challenged in this passage to ask that question, is there a boat that I won't leave because I'm comfortable or afraid or whatever it may be? You know, what do I need to leave behind so that I can follow Jesus? I think that's a really important question that this story kind of leaves us with.
Yeah, absolutely. So we hope that you got something out of this today. We hope that you look at these questions and answer these questions for yourself, and look at the scripture, read through it. Maybe the Spirit revealed something to you that we missed or we didn't see. But just look at these questions. They'll be, again, they're in the description below, as well as some other questions. And I'll the other two questions that we'd like you to look at and answer for yourselves is, what do you hear in our passage today? I mean, and we'd love for you to type that into the comments below, and we'll respond to that.
Yeah, share it with us, please.
Please do.
Yeah, what did you hear in the passage today? I mean, if you don't want it to be public on YouTube, on the Facebook, or on the comments section, in the comments section of YouTube, send it to us through Facebook, or a lot of you have our phones numbers and text us.
And I'll just add in really quick, Sam, like, seriously, we want to hear what you guys hear, especially if it's totally different from what we hear.
Yeah.
Like, Sam, Kyle, and we're all the same age. And I don't mean that like close. We all graduated class of 2009. Like, we are the same age. And so we're in the same demographic. We have a lot of similar views. We've been friends for a long time, which is really great. There are a lot of really wonderful pieces to that. But it may mean that someone outside of that circle, a different age, different experience, is going to hear something completely different than what we just talked about, which is awesome. That's why we want to do this. That's why we want your input too.
Yeah. Along with that, I'm going to say, this isn't on there, but if you have any questions about the passage or about something, leave it in the comments. Send it to us. If you have a question about Luke 5, 1 through 11, just ask, and we'll try to do our best and answer that question for you next week. And the second question that we need to ask you is, what is your boat that you need to leave behind to follow Jesus? And that's kind of a rhetorical question. We don't want you to put that in the comments unless you feel really, really comfortable with everybody, because this is public. That's a public forum. But if you need help with this stuff, let us know. Kyle and I are both youth ministers, and I'm sure Nikki would give up her time to answer and help you with this, because there are boats. I have a boat. Kyle has a boat. Nikki has a boat that we're all holding on to that we need to leave behind. And if you are struggling with something, let us know. We will help you through it. This is what this is what this is all about. I mean, we're making disciples here, and part of that discipleship is being vulnerable and opening up, and being able to talk about that stuff, because if you truly want to be a follower of Jesus, you need to give some stuff up. So
please reach out to us. That's the other thing, like, talking with you guys, that's our bread and butter. Like, getting together to film with each other is fun and it's cool and it's great, but what we really want is to connect with you.
Yes.
So please reach out, like, text us, comment, FaceTime, whatever it is, whatever you're comfortable with. Write us a letter, send it in snail mail. I don't know what your jam is, but we want to connect with you. Yeah.
And the shameless plug time. Like, subscribe, and follow for us. It really helps us out if you like, subscribe, and follow. If you're still here. If you're still listening to us, which I hope you are. But like, subscribe, and follow us. Like I said, it really helps us out and gets the algorithm. It shares it with more people. And so, anyway, we hope you enjoyed this week, and we ask that you live it out now.